There's a remarkable story hidden in this historic record of a trial held nearly 250 years ago in Cape Town, South Africa. It's the story of a free man named Masavana, enslaved through deception, determined to win back his freedom by taking over a notorious Dutch slave ship. This was a fight to the death struggle between slaves and sailors. There could only be one victor. The ship lies buried under these waves at Cape Agulhas, the southernmost tip of Africa. This slave ship mutiny has been largely forgotten. But now 3 people are searching out the facts of this incredible event and discovering the amazing story of Masavana, the man now being hailed as one of South Africa's first freedom fighters. Professor Nigel Warden studies the history of Cape Town under Dutch rule and wants to know how and why the mutiny happened. Slave descendant Lucy Campbell wants to know who were Cape Town's slave ancestors and how did they struggle for their freedom. And marine archaeologist Jaco Boshoff wants to find the remains of the slave ship at the heart of this story. It was called the Meermin. It sailed from Madagascar in January 1766 with over 140 enslaved people in its hold. This would be its final voyage. Cape Town, South Africa is a thriving city whose residents can trace their ancestry back to far-flung countries all around the Indian Ocean. Most of their ancestors didn't come here as immigrants, however. They were brought to the Cape as slaves. Cape Town was founded in 1652 to supply food and water for the merchant ships of the Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC. This was a company town, and the VOC wanted to keep it that way. Commerce was king.
The VOC was a commercial company, but it was also a government. It was a state within a state, if you like. It had been given the authority by the States General in the Netherlands to rule, to run law, to make treaties, to declare wars, as well as to trade. So it was much more than just a trading company. In the Cape, it had total power. It was the state, and it had the right of life and death over all of the inhabitants of the colony.
The historic documents of the VOC are held in Cape Town's provincial archives. Here, 48 kilometers of documents hold the secrets of life in Cape Town's slave society and why the Meermin was bringing slaves here.
They did not want a settler colony here at the Cape. They didn't want lots of immigrants coming in. That would have been expensive for them. They didn't want people to establish themselves as independent farmers. And instead, therefore, of encouraging immigrants, they turned to slave labour.
From 1658, 63,000 people were brought to Cape Town as slaves. They came from locations all around the Indian Ocean, from Eastern Africa through India to Indonesia. Slavery continued until 1838. As Cape Town expanded, its free citizens purchased slaves for domestic labor. Cape Town became a slave society. Today, their descendants want to know their history, none more so than heritage activist Lucy Campbell.
When slaves came to the Cape, their names were changed. If it was a name like Sangora or Masavana, and they arrived in Cape Town, say on February 15th or September, they would have been named September, the month when they arrived. Just like to indicate to you, there's September. Look at all these names. Thousands of them, thousands of them. Look at all the Februaries you see here. All these are names of slaves that were brought to the Cape. A lot of the people in Cape Town, I would say even the majority of the people in Cape Town, are slave descendants, whether they are white, whether they are black, or whether they are so-called colored.
By 1766, Cape Town had grown into a sizable settlement with over 7,000 inhabitants, 2/3 of them slaves. Keeping so many people under control required constant supervision and coercion. Even the very architecture of a typical Cape Town house was designed to control slaves. This is Koopman de Vet House, now a museum. It once housed a family of 13 Europeans, the de Vet family, and their 26 slaves.
This house would have been a house of a very wealthy owner that would have had slaves. And the house was built specifically around slaves, because without slaves, they couldn't function. They couldn't function at all. So this would have been the center or the domain of the mistress of the house. The mistress of the house could watch over the slaves outside, and she could watch slaves coming up and down from the steps. This would have been almost like a web, and she would have been in the center. There would have been an eye on them at all times. Whatever they did, there was an eye on them. And the weird thing is that there was not physical control, but there was the psychological control, where the master or the mistress didn't have to use physical abuse, but the mental slavery was the psychological slavery. A slave was at the mercy of the master at all times. A master could ask anything of that slave. Brush my shoes, put on my shirt, carry this, carry that, come lay with me. They could basically ask for anything because the master owned that slave. That slave was a commodity.
Acquiring these commodities was the business of the slave ship Meermin, whose sailors traded guns and gunpowder for people. On January 20th, 1766, they set sail from Betisboka Bay in western Madagascar. Their heading was for Cape Town. 3 crew members would play critical roles in what was about to happen. Gerrit Muller was the ship's captain. This was his first time running a slave ship. The man in charge of the VOC's cargo of slaves was the chief merchant, Johan Krause. Krause had been on slave journeys to Madagascar before, as had his assistant, Olaf Liev.
The Meermin story is indeed one of the most remarkable of the whole of the period of slavery at the Cape, although it's relatively little known about, both in South Africa or outside it. But what is particularly extraordinary is that we have records of that. We have the very words of the people who participated in that. The Dutch East India Company was an incredibly bureaucratic organisation and must have been hell to work for. It recorded everything.
Those words were recorded when the survivors of the Meermin shipwreck were brought to Cape Town and grilled by the VOC's very own Court of Justice.
And one thing we know is that Muller was only recently appointed as a captain. He hadn't had much experience of being on a slave ship, whereas Krause had. And all the way through the records, we see Krause reminding Muller, who is in fact his superior, that actually he knows a lot more about how to sail a slave ship than Muller does. So Muller's authority is being rather undermined by Krause, this younger man, but nonetheless a man who has more experience of this.
This struggle over leadership would compromise the Dutch crew. The VOC preferred to import children to work in Cape Town. They survived the voyage better than adults and would provide more labour over the course of their lives. The average age of an imported slave was just 16. The true face of slavery can be seen in photos of real slave children taken from Madagascar in 1868. The slave ship carrying them was intercepted by a British naval vessel and the children rescued. The photos have attracted the attention of South Africa's leading human rights advocate, Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
They remind one so very much of pictures out of the Holocaust, bells and things of that sort, just showing our inhumanity to one another. We have bandied about that word, slavery, not always aware of just how inhumane the conditions were.
In the 18th century, more than 12 million people were taken out of Africa on slave ships. The vast majority were sent to the Americas. The ships that took them are the research subject of marine archaeologists like Jaco Bosso. If he can find the Meermin, it will be one of only a few such vessels yet discovered.
The important thing about it is that she was a slave vessel, and then the fact that there was a rebellion on board, and that's the main reason why she got wrecked. Also, we do not know too much about these vessels that the Dutch East India Company used at the Cape for slavery.
This coastline is called the graveyard of shipwrecks. More than 200 lie buried here. The low oxygen environment of the seabed should preserve the Meermin wreck. But where is it?
We know that the Meermin does not have a lot of material left on it, because a lot of it was taken off at the time when she wrecked. So it is a bit like finding a needle in a haystack underwater and under sand.
The most effective way to find it is by locating any iron-based artifacts that went down with the wooden ship. This crop duster is equipped with highly sensitive magnetometry sensors which can penetrate through ocean water and beach sand. If any iron remains of the Meermin are here, they will leave a magnetic trace.
We're very fortunate in the fact that we've got this ship's plan of the Meermin, which we found was in the Scheepvaart Museum in Amsterdam. It will guide us towards what the size of the vessel was, how wide it was, how many ribs did it have. A vessel like this, obviously made largely out of timber, would have used oak. So oak is something that we're looking for. And then the fastenings would have been metal, would have been iron. So there's a lot of iron there, and that's what we're hoping to pick up with the magnetometer.
The Meermin's fate was sealed by the people held in its slave deck. Their chains did not prevent them from choosing leaders for their rebellion. Even before they sailed, one man led an escape attempt and was punished. His name was Masavana. He was from the village of Tulier in western Madagascar. He had many supporters, including a strong fighter named Kosage. His experience on board the Meermin was later recorded in detail by the VOC. Now Lucy Campbell wants to read this first-hand account of a free man turned slave.
I gather you want to know about Masavana, what we can find out about him. What is really exciting is that here we have the cross-examination of Masavana at his trial. And here he is, Masavana from Madagascar, age about 26 years old. So we know that he was 26. And he's asked questions about what happened on board the ship, but also he gives details about how he came to be sold as a slave.
My name is Masavana. I was asked by the king of Tulia to visit the Dutch ship. We went to view the ship. I was dressed in clean clothes with gold and silver ornaments. When this was done, halfway back the king tied me up, and his people undressed me. They took my gold, silver, and clothes off my body, and they sold me as a slave.
Scattered around Cape Town are the remains of old slave lodges, where the memories of Cape Town's slave history can still be experienced.
Before the Europeans came to Madagascar, the Madagascans, they fought amongst each other. Those that won these battles used to take slaves as spoils of war, and they used to sell these slaves to the Europeans So now there was a market for them, and the king took advantage of this. And this is how they started, it became a regular thing. And it became a trading post for the Europeans and for the Madagascans to trade in slaves.
Most of the slaves purchased by the VOC would remain their property, but Cape Town did have a robust trade in slaves for those brought by private slave traders. A typical slave would cost the equivalent of 2 oxen and a cart.
You are just a commodity. You can't think, you can't say anything. You have to be quiet at all times. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be selling you. Now remember, there's going to be people standing there. They are the buyers. And they're going to bid for you. So now I want you to come forward. I'm going to be looking for, can he hear properly? Can he see? Do you have all your teeth?
Hy sal vir jou hard werk, lank en hard, lank en hard. 200 sê die man.
You've got strong muscles. And that's why it's important that I have a strong slave, because what's the use then for me to buy you if you can't work for me? I'm going to have me the slave. He's perfect, he's young, he's strong enough, and he can work for me. Long hours, he can carry wood, he can carry water, and we can have lots of other slaves.
The Meermin had a 4-week journey to Cape Town at the height of summer. Temperatures could exceed 40 degrees. What was it like below deck? What did the Malagasy slaves experience? Jaco Boshoff is conducting a detailed study of the Meermin blueprints to create an accurate 3D computer graphic model of the slave ship. By understanding the architecture of the ship, he can understand how the subsequent rebellion played out.
The vessel was about 30 odd meters long, so it's quite small. They didn't want to have a big vessel because it costs more money.
The Meermin was a multi-purpose cargo vessel called a hooker, outfitted in Amsterdam in 1761 to carry slaves. When sailing on a slaving voyage, over 200 people would be crammed onto it. 60 of them would be sailors, working in 2 shifts. Those at rest would be in the forward cabins at the bow. The officers were based towards the stern, with the captain's cabin and officers' mess built under the quarterdeck. Below this, the gun room, where ample supplies of guns were kept for trading slaves. If the vessel was following VOC rules, there would be no sign of any slave on the top deck. They would be kept below. The only access, one of 2 hatches cut through the deck. This is where they were expected to remain for the course of the journey.
These people would be shackled up in the slave deck. So we'd have rows of people, 2 shackled, and they would often have one long chain running the whole length to get as many slaves in as possible. You can remember, in the 18th century, there was no human rights. The human rights didn't exist.
There would be little light. All the gun hatches sealed up to prevent slaves escaping. The only ventilation, the 2 small hatches to the top deck.
In fact, some of these vessels, you couldn't light a candle because the air was so stuffy and rotten.
Nigel Warden is investigating just how many people were enslaved on the Meermin.
One of the puzzling things about some of these sources is that the numbers of slaves on board the ship don't add up. You could say that that was bad memory, but I think there's something else going on here. We know that on board all VOC vessels, certainly the captain and the higher officers, were carrying goods which they were not declaring to the company and they were selling off privately themselves. This is how most slaves actually got to the Cape. And in this case, what I think is clearly happening is that they've got more slaves than they've officially admitted to the company, and they're hoping they're going to be able to sell them off privately themselves when they get to Cape Town. And the consequence of this is that people like Muller and Krause are desperate to cram as many slaves on board the ship as they can, more so than they're declaring, which means there's going to be overcrowding, desperate overcrowding as a result.
Consequence that you get is disease. You would get things like dysentery, typhus, and things like that that would break out under conditions like this. And you've had some of these vessels with large amounts of deaths.
The Meermin survivors later testified to the VOC that disease was rife on their ship too. Slaves were dying, and the disease was spreading.
I think the situation in the deck was very volatile. With the smell and the stench and that sickness, because there was disease also underneath that ship. The Dutch were scared that something was going to happen, they were going to die, and they were going to lose their commodity.
2 days into the voyage, Krause made a fatal decision, according to Captain Muller's testimony to the VOC.
Krause strongly requested that the slaves be freed from their shackles and that we should let them loose on the ship.
When your cargo is spices or material goods being brought from Asia, which most of the ships were carrying, then it was in the interest of both of them to keep them safe and to keep the ship sailing. But when your cargo are human beings, and the issue is their health and keeping them alive, and by bringing them up on board the deck, which Krause did, it's actually endangering the security of the ship, then you've got a division of interest between the two of them. So here we have Muller saying that Krause had said that on all these other journeys he'd let the slaves free from their chains, so he never had to have anything to fear from them.
I did not want to give permission for this, but the surgeon said there were no medicines on board to prevent illness, and that the crew was also starting to suffer.
The captain's authority was to do with the vessel itself, sailing the vessel. So in essence, the head merchant had a lot of influence in terms of what happens to the slaves on the vessel.
Krause told me that if the slaves became ill, and if some of them died, it would be my responsibility. I agreed that some slaves could be freed.
This decision was critical, for it played right into the hands of the Malagasy slaves.
The slaves planned for a long time to become masters of the ship. Our aim was to go back to our own country.
I think underneath the deck, they believed that they were going to take over the ship because they were free men in their mentality. They were not mentally enslaved at that point yet. They were strong men that believed that they were going to be free, even though they were in chains and in shackles.
We were ordered to work on the ship. We often pulled ropes. We worked with sails.
Putting the slaves to work made it easier for the sailors, something they could get used to.
Krause told me it was not dangerous to unshackle the slaves. From time to time thereafter, more slaves were freed.
You've got all the ammunition, if you will, for an explosive situation. All the elements are there. Basically, all you needed was a trigger, and that trigger was supplied by the senior merchant, funny enough, the man who was the greediest of the lot.
It was February the 18th. Sailor Herman Korps was ordered to fetch the assegais and swords to be cleaned.
Assegais are traditional Malagasy weapons of war, spears.
But what the Dutch often forgot, and certainly in the case in the Meermin story, is that the Malagasys was a warlike people. So you would have characters on board this vessel that inherently wanted to break free.
It was morning. A sailor brought the assegais to us, 6 in total.
Krause was laughing and said, I'm sure there are people who would doubt the wisdom of asking slaves to clean these weapons.
I can't believe that they actually did it. I mean, how can you give slaves weapons? At that point, they didn't think that the slaves would do it, because a slave doesn't think. A slave don't make decisions. A slave doesn't have an opinion. A slave is property.
The slaves had 4 assegas in our possession when the battle started. We all attacked at the same time.
Suddenly I heard screaming and groaning of some of the crew.
Krauser was stabbed in his chest and also his belly. He fell down dead immediately. Several sailors fled into the main top. 3 of them were thrown overboard.
Then they started running to the cabin. I was then stabbed on my left side. I received another 2 stabs in my back. All these wounds were inflicted on me by Masavana.
The captain wasn't safe in his cabin. The slaves would break through the door. So he climbed out the port window and slid down the rudder to the gunroom. Up on deck, the Malagasy took possession of the muskets.
We decided to do everything possible to become masters of the ship, even if we had to stay at the sea a long time. Madagascar!
I think he actually did surprise himself. In that few hours, he conquered the mighty VOC and he took over that ship.
30 sailors were killed in the uprising, stabbed, shot, or thrown overboard. The survivors barricaded themselves in the gunroom below deck. The 30 remaining sailors had only a sack of potatoes, some raw bacon, and a cask of palm wine to fortify their nerves. They knew they couldn't remain here for long. They needed food. They needed to take back their ship.
Now, these guys are sitting at the back. There's very little supplies in the area where they are, because most of the supplies would have been kept up front. And for them to get to that, they would have had to run the gauntlet of all these slaves, which is quite difficult. I mean, obviously, they did try that, and the slaves would be shooting down from the hatches.
The slaves moved around the hatch and threatened to jump to the lower deck. They shot down at the crew, who returned fire. At 8 a.m. on the 3rd day, the sailors made a sally against the slaves. The mate was killed, and another man was also shot dead. And 2 more sailors died of their wounds a few days later.
Okay, so now you had the slaves in control, but they weren't quite fully in control. The reason being that they were now in charge of a machine that they didn't know how to operate. And this is the ship. They didn't know how to sail the vessel.
By now, the Meermin was drifting aimlessly hundreds of kilometers from land. The sailors became desperate.
The ship's mate brought up a barrel containing 25 pounds of gunpowder. He took this upstairs and lit it with the purpose of frightening the slaves.
The plan blew up in the sailors' faces, but it got the slaves' attention.
A female slave was asked to tell them that the sailors would blow up the whole deck with all the slaves if they would not surrender themselves, and to offer them a peace proposal. The slaves agreed and asked to see me.
Olaf Ley knew enough Malagasy to communicate with them.
Olaf Ley is really left in charge of things because Krauser's now dead, Muller is still sick and unable to take any control.
Madagascar
They told me they should be taken back to their own country and to throw the gunpowder overboard. They told the slaves that we would not throw the gunpowder overboard, but we would take the slaves back to their own country, Madagascar. In this manner, peace was made.
Het zal echt wees. Ons de contract.
Als je het gaat doen, blijf je zeggen.
The deal was agreed. But Olaf Ley and his captain planned on having the last laugh. They had no intention of taking the Malagasy back to their homeland.
I gave instructions that the ship should set course in the direction of Cape Town. The captain instructed me to set a course to north-northwest in order to get near land.
They agree that they will take the slaves back to Madagascar by sailing east. But in fact, they sail the ship northwest, and therefore the ship's going in the opposite direction.
The deception was a breathtaking gamble. By returning to Madagascar, they would lose the VOC's precious cargo, but in taking them to Cape Town, the sailors would lose their lives if found out.
It is a very risky strategy. First of all, they really don't know just how much the slaves in Masavana would know about the currents and where they are.
The north-northwest heading that the captain set would take them straight to the southernmost tip of Africa, the graveyard of shipwrecks. It's been 2 weeks since Jaco's magnetometry survey. He now has the results.
This blue band represents the flight path of the aircraft that carried the magnetometers. And what it shows us are these anomalies, the red dots that you can see, like that one, for instance, is a fishing trawler that we know of. What's more interesting are the smaller ones that you cannot see so clearly that are very likely to be the Meermin because she was a smaller ship and wooden and has broken up over the years, obviously. So we are really interested in those.
The only problem is that Jaco's favorite locations are all underwater. He wants to first journey out into the bay to see for himself where the slave ship drama played out. On the 28th of February, 10 days after the mutiny, the Meermin sailed into view of land near the Dutch settlement of Streesby. Most of the Malagasy thought they were home, but Masavana had doubts.
But then, as it's described here, the leader asks Ley why he had not taken them to their country. And how did he know this? Well, he knew this because the sun wasn't rising in his face. In other words, they weren't facing east as they should have been. And Ley, who has been rumbled, of course, at this point, with fairly quick wits perhaps, that, well, they're on the east side of Madagascar. Then the leader points out something else.
A number of birds were seen, and the slaves said that one couldn't find such birds on Madagascar.
And Ley then comes up with this answer. Well, these are the kinds of birds that are found on small islands lying off the coast of Madagascar and were typical of the ones which wouldn't have been founded on the west coast. I think there's no doubt that if we put ourselves, or try to put ourselves in the minds of the slaves and of Masavana, they might have realised that, or suspected that something's gone wrong here. But on the other hand, at last they're seeing land and they're hoping against hope that freedom is going to be theirs at last.
One could probably think of the Malagasys on the ship, thinking that this might be Madagascar, an excitement. You know, finally, after so many days, getting off the stinking tub. And being excited, and you have the sailors in the other sense also being excited, but for a different reason, because they know they're at the Cape Agulhas and they know that salvation is at hand for them.
Resting at anchor 2 kilometers offshore, the beleaguered Meermin would now draw a new group of characters into the story. Local farmers noticed its flag was not flying, a sign of distress. A report of a suspect ship was immediately sent to the VOC's head official for the area, Johannes Le Sueur.
I think Le Sueur, the magistrate in Stellenbosch, is the key figure here. He has to go there. It's part of his district, this enormous district of the colony. And Agulhas is not Cape Town. He's in a very remote part of the colony. There are not troops around him, so he's on his own there.
Le Sueur knew he must contain the slave rebellion. The VOC was running a slave society.
So my back.
News of a successful slave revolt could send panic through the colony and empower more slaves to take up arms.
The next morning, the slaves demanded to go to the shore in a rowboat. As many as possible boarded. The boat would return after the slaves landed ashore.
They agreed they would light 3 bonfires on the beach if this was Madagascar.
No, Leigh's playing a very cunning game here. He's trying to outwit the slaves at their own game, as it were. But of course, he's a very desperate man because he knows that once those slaves get ashore and discover they're not in Madagascar, and if they get back to the ship and can report that back to Masavana and the others, all hell is going to break loose, and they're going to have their throats cut.
By the time the Malagasy arrived on shore, the local farmers were waiting. They had formed a militia. Malagasy were killed, the rest put back in chains. From his position on the Meermin, Masavana could not see the massacre on the beach. He was waiting for the bonfires. Johannes Le Sueur arrived in Strathspey on March the 2nd, 2 days after the Meermin was spotted. He quickly took charge of the situation on shore. For 3 more days, Masavana and the others waited for the bonfire signal. In the gunroom, the sailors' situation was reaching a crisis point.
Leigh came to tell me that it wouldn't be long before the slaves would break through the hold and get to the gunpowder room. We could not stay at anchor any longer.
And this is the letter which comes from Leigh, which he had written, sort of cooped up in this room, and one has the sort of notion of him writing this in a rather cramped handwriting. You can see here the handwriting is extremely erratic, and it's a letter of desperation.
Through the guidance of our almighty and beloved God, the 140 male and female slaves which we exchanged at Madagascar have revolted and taken over the Meermin. About 70 of them went ashore with the boat, but at least 50 have remained on board. 32 of the Europeans are still alive, but most of them are wounded. The slaves are in control of the whole ship, except for the gunroom, to which we have fled.
One of the most extraordinary things in this extremely extraordinary case is the story of this bottle and what happened to it.
We are scared the slaves may attack and kill us at any moment. We continually pray to our Lord for his mercy and that he may rescue us from our miserable plight.
This is a man who is facing the fact that he's about to meet his maker. He believes he's going to die. And his only hope is to be able to hope that by throwing the bottle overboard, somebody's going to find it and the authorities are going to come to their rescue. If you wrote this up in a novel, nobody would believe it. But it actually happened, and it happened like this. And what happens? This bottle is found by a coy woman who is on the shore. She takes it to the authorities, and who's the authority? It just happens to be the Landdrost of Stellenbosch who's there.
Although we trust in the Lord to save us, we kindly request the finder of this letter to light 3 fires on the beach and stand guard at these behind the dunes, should the ship run aground, so that the slaves may not become aware that this is a Christian country. They will certainly kill us if they establish that we made them believe that this is their country. In the name of the Lord, we remain your obedient servant. Olaf Lay.
So Lesueur's in a real dilemma. He's got to decide what to do. You know, either way, he's taking a big risk, and he's taking a risk for, in the one case, perhaps the future of the colony, one might say. Certainly the dangers of slaves running amok on land. On the other hand, he runs the risk of losing the cargo, losing the ship. And I suspect as a result he would have lost his job and probably a great deal more as well. So in the end, what does he decide to do? He takes the risk. He'll light the fires.
On March the 7th, a week after arriving at Strathspey, the Malagasy saw the signal they were waiting for.
Madagascar!
The slaves were eager to get ashore. The weather was in their favor. High winds and currents pushed the ship closer and closer to shore.
The vessel drifted towards the beach. To avoid disaster, it was decided to beach the ship. In strong seas, the ship would have been smashed up and no souls would have been saved. When the ship touched ground, I gave the order to cut the mainmast.
The first group of Malagasy went ashore in the one remaining rowboat. Lesueur positioned his homegrown militia out of sight behind the dunes. He had orders from Cape Town to recapture the slaves but not harm them. But he quickly lost control of the nervous farmers.
They were attacked near the dunes and shot at.
At last, Masavana and his countrymen realized they'd been deceived.
Madagascar!
They knew their journey home was over.
I think it must have been a moment of distress, a moment of pain, knowing that this is the end, that I'm going to be taken.
On March the 9th, 19 days after taking over the Meermin, Masavana and his countrymen gave up their struggle. They would be taken to Cape Town immediately. The Meermin would be left behind, a wreck, never to sail again. Soon after, the VOC Court of Justice put both slave leaders and sailors on trial. Someone was going to pay for their loss. The VOC had a severe punishment for any slave who attacked his master: death by impalement on a stake.
end of the trial, this record that we've got of all the trial, you would expect that the result of this would be that Masavana would receive the most gruesome kind of death sentence, which is what happened to slaves who had revolted against their owners or against the company. You would also expect that Muller, who's also put on trial for negligence, would perhaps have got a mild punishment or a ticking off, but it's really Masavana who would have got the full force of the law. Absolutely the opposite happens.
Gerrit Muller was stripped of his captain's rank and wages and forbidden from serving in the VOC for the remainder of his life. He was banned from the Cape and put on the first ship returning to Amsterdam, on which he would have to work for his passage. He was fined 1 month's wages and ordered to pay the costs of the case. And despite all his efforts, Olaf Ley was also fired from the VOC. As assistant chief merchant, he was expected to have obeyed company rules.
All through the trial, Masavana denies some of the key things that he's been accused of. I get the sense of him as a very forceful man. Look at these answers he gives to some of the questions. It's sort of, is it not the case that you had planned to do this and to attack the Europeans? No! Exclamation mark. He's forceful on this. Defiant, exactly. It's not possible for the court to have enough definitive evidence to be able to execute him. It was very important that you had somebody who could provide definitive evidence against someone in a trial who were honourable men, trustworthy men. There weren't many of these around in this trial. So really, the company is caught in its own legal laws here. These are the words they use, definitive Vornisse. They haven't got definitive enough evidence in order to be able to pass a death sentence on him, and instead they are going to place him provisionally. They're going to ban him to Robben Island. What I think is particularly moving is that he signs right at the end here, there. He signs with his mark, his cross. He makes the sign of the cross. This is the one mark in this huge archive which Masavana himself left directly on the page.
Masavana's story doesn't end here, for there is another document in the VOC archive that Nigel has discovered.
So these are the registers of the people who were sent to Robben Island, and as you can see, this is in 1766, so the year just after his trial. Masavana from Madagascar, sentenced at the Cape on the 25th of August, and there he is. It says, you see here the people who'd arrived, and there's Masavana, together with Corset, the two of them. What to me is the moving part. It gives the details of everybody else of how long they've been sentenced for on the island. 5 years, 15 years. But for Masavana and Corset, it says, put on the island until further instructions. So they're dumped there at the mercy of the court to decide how long they're going to stay there. There's no termination to this.
In our country, if somebody kills a person, the king will find the murderer. I am an imprisoned man and only a slave. And you can do with me what you want.
Robben Island was used to imprison troublesome rebel leaders from all over the VOC's colonial empire, from as far away as Indonesia. Masavana was in good company.
And then 4 years later, we get the news here that Masavana has died on the 20th of December, 1769. Just over 3 years he lived on the island and then died as a company slave.
Robben Island was where people were sent to be forgotten. But Masavana's memory as a freedom fighter lives on.
It does show people that the resistance to oppression is not a new thing. It's part of history.
It's what's keeping Jaco searching for the wreck of the Meermin.
Someone asked a famous mountaineer at one stage, why do you climb mountains? And he said, because it's there. And I think it's in a sense similar. I think the wreck is there. We need to find it.
Jaco is now ready to begin the next phase of the Meermin story, to find the wreck itself. As for the VOC, it went bankrupt in 1798 due to rampant corruption. For Lucy, Masavana's mutiny was a triumph. He didn't get home, but he did destroy the slave ship Meermin.
The fact that that boat, the Meermin, will never ever sail again, for me is a celebration. That they will never carry human cargo. That the Meermin is a wreck.
Masavana's co-leader, Kosage, survived 20 years here. Both men are buried on Robben Island.
I would like to believe he is here, but there is so many unmarked graves. It could be anyone. But for me, the memory of Masavana will always live on, because I have gotten to know Masavana. And this memory I will carry over from generation to generation. For me, he is here somewhere. And for me, he's amongst the heroes of all heroes.
It says something about human beings, that there is something in us that refuses to be regarded as less than human. We are created for freedom. That's why slavery is going to fail ultimately. That is why injustice fails ultimately, oppression fails ultimately.
Masavana was just one of tens of thousands of enslaved people whose lives were recorded in this vast archive. Because he fought for his freedom, he is now being remembered, an unlikely hero who just wanted to go home.